The cold steel of the champagne bucket hit the floor with a hollow clang, splashing icy water across my threadbare sneakers. Julian didn't flinch. He leaned back in his velvet chair, swirling a vintage crystal flute while his new bride-to-be, Tiffany, giggled, her 5-carat diamond catching the harsh gala lights. "Careful, Ava," Julian sneered, his voice loud enough to turn the heads of every billionaire in the room. "The floor is already cleaner than that apartment I left you in. If you drop another bottle, the bill for the vintage alone will take you 10 years of waitressing to pay off." He reached into his silk tuxedo pocket and tossed a crumpled $20 bill onto the wet floor. "Take it. Consider it a tip for finally learning your place." My fingers curled into my palms until my nails drew blood, the sting of the salt air from the open terrace mixing with the scent of expensive cologne and my own burning humiliation. 3 years ago, I was the one wearing his ring, planning a future that didn't involve scrubbing floors. Now, I am the girl in the polyester uniform, a ghost at the feast of the man who sold my father's business out from under us and left me with nothing but a mountain of debt and a sick mother. Julian thinks he's won. He thinks the world is divided into those who sit at the table and those who serve it. But he doesn't know about the black SUV idling in the shadows of the driveway, or the man with the silver-handled cane who watched me enter this building tonight. If you believe Julian deserves to lose everything the way he took everything from Ava, hit the like button so her story reaches the ones who fight back. I knelt to pick up the bucket, my knees hitting the damp carpet. Tiffany's pointed heel came down, pinning my wrist against the floor. "You missed a spot, honey," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with a cruelty that matched Julian's. "And maybe after the shift you can take the leftovers home. I hear the poor love cold lobster." I pulled my arm back, but the heel dug deeper, the pressure sharp and bruising. I looked up and for a second the room went silent. The heavy oak doors at the end of the ballroom didn't just open. They were thrown wide by men who didn't look like guests. They wore charcoal suits and earpieces, their faces carved from granite. The crowd parted like a receding tide. A rhythmic thud-clack echoed against the marble, the sound of a heavy cane tipped with reinforced steel. The man walking through the center of the room didn't look at the gala's host or the mayor standing by the bar. His eyes, the color of a winter sea, were fixed entirely on me. This was Silas Vane. The man the newspapers called a philanthropist and the police called the city's shadow king. Julian's face drained of color, his smug grin evaporating into a mask of pure terror. He stood up so quickly his chair tumbled backward. Silas stopped 3 feet from our table. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at Tiffany's heel, still pinning my wrist. He didn't raise his voice, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Remove your foot," Silas said. Tiffany scrambled back, nearly tripping over her own train. Silas stepped into the puddle of champagne, his handmade Italian leather shoes unbothered by the mess. He reached down not for the bucket but for my hand. His grip was warm, rough with calluses and completely immovable. He pulled me to my feet with a single, effortless motion. "You're late for dinner, Ava," he murmured, his thumb brushing over the red mark Tiffany's shoe had left on my skin. Julian stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Mr. Vane. I didn't realize, she's just a server. She's my ex-fiancé, Silas finally turned his head. The look in his eyes made Julian stop mid-sentence, his throat working as he tried to swallow. Silas didn't answer him. Instead, he reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief, white and pristine. He took the crumpled $20 bill from the floor with the cloth, as if it were contaminated. Silas handed the bill to one of his guards. "Burn this," Silas commanded. "And buy this man's company tomorrow morning. I want him out of his office by noon." Silas turned back to me, his shadow swallowing Julian entirely. "Shall we go?" I looked at Julian, seeing the exact moment he realized his world had just ended, but my gaze was pulled back to the man holding my hand. Silas didn't wait for a reply. He led me through the stunned silence of the ballroom, the guards forming a wall behind us that no one dared to cross. We stepped out into the humid night air, where the black SUV sat vibrating like a beast waiting to be unleashed. He opened the door for me, his expression unreadable, a wall of stone that had suddenly become my only shield. As the door closed, sealing out the noise of the gala, Silas leaned in close, the scent of cedar and cold metal clinging to him. "Julian was wrong about one thing," Silas whispered as the car roared to life. "You don't belong at his table. He belongs under yours." The city blurred into a streak of neon and gray as the SUV tore through the streets, breaking every red light without a second thought. I sat pressed into the leather seat, the adrenaline finally fading into a hollow tremor in my hands. Silas watched me from the shadows of the interior, his cane resting between his knees, his ring, a heavy gold signet with a crest I didn't recognize, glinting every time we passed a streetlight. He hadn't said a word since we left the hotel, but the silence wasn't empty, it was heavy with the weight of the debt I now owed him. "Why?" I finally asked, my voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "You didn't have to do that. You just destroyed a man's life for a girl you met in a library 3 weeks ago." Silas didn't move his head, but his eyes shifted toward me. "Julian didn't lose his company because of you, Ava. He lost it because he was stupid enough to let the most valuable thing he ever owned walk away. I don't like waste." He reached out, his fingers hovering over the bruise on my wrist before pulling back. "And I don't like people who touch what belongs to me." The car came to a stop in front of a sprawling estate hidden behind iron gates and a wall of ancient oaks. This wasn't a house, it was a fortress. Men with rifles stood on the perimeter, their silhouettes sharp against the moon. Silas stepped out and waited for me, his posture perfectly still, a king returning to his seat. He led me inside to a dining room where the table was set for two, the silver polished to a mirror finish. He pulled out my chair, his movements fluid despite the slight limp in his stride. "Eat," he said, gesturing to the spread of food that looked like a work of art. I picked up a fork but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The memory of Julian's laughter kept echoing in my ears, mixed with the sight of my mother's empty medicine bottles on the kitchen counter. "I can't pay you back for the company, Silas. Or for the gala. I have nothing." Silas sat down, pouring himself a glass of dark red wine. He watched me for a long moment, the flickering candlelight casting long, dancing shadows across his face. "I don't want your money, Ava. I have more than enough of that. I want your loyalty. I'm going to give you Julian's house, his cars, his pride. And in exchange, you're going to help me find the man who killed your father." The fork hit the plate with a sharp crack. My heart stopped. "My father died in a car accident." The police report said. Silas leaned forward, his eyes turning to flint. "The police report was written by a man on Julian's payroll. Your father didn't lose control of his car. The brakes were cut. And Julian wasn't the one who held the knife, but he was the one who paid for the blade." I stared at him, the room spinning, the taste of copper in my mouth. Everything I thought I knew about the last 3 years was a lie. My poverty, my mother's illness, Julian's sudden wealth, it wasn't bad luck. It was a harvest. Silas reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "I've been watching you for a long time, Ava. Not because of Julian. Because your father was my friend. And he would have hated what you've become, a girl who lets Tiffany's heel bruise her skin." He stood up, his cane tapping rhythmically as he walked toward the window. "Tomorrow you start your new life. You will never wear a uniform again. You will never apologize for being in a room again. But you will have to learn how to be a Vane." He turned back to me, the moon behind him making him a silhouette of pure power. "Are you ready to stop serving and start ruling? If you think Ava should take the deal and burn Julian's world to the ground, drop a like so the algorithm knows this story matters." The morning sun didn't just wake me, it blinded me as it bounced off the marble floors of a bedroom larger than my entire apartment. On the edge of the bed sat a row of shopping bags from designers I'd only ever seen in the trash piles of the girls I used to serve. There was a note on the nightstand written in a sharp, masculine hand. "The car is waiting. Don't be late for the bank." I dressed in a suit of cream-colored wool that felt like a second skin, the fabric so expensive it was silent when I moved. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. The hollow look in my eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, sharpened edge. I walked down the grand staircase where Silas was waiting, reading a newspaper and sipping black coffee. He didn't say I looked good. He didn't have to. He just stood up and handed me a leather folder. "Today you sign the papers. By noon Julian's penthouse belongs to you. By 1 his bank accounts are frozen." We walked out to the car, but as the gates opened, a crowd of reporters swarmed the SUV. Cameras flashed like lightning. I saw Tiffany in the center of the crowd, her hair disheveled, her expensive dress from the night before rumpled. She was screaming, trying to push past the guards. "Ava, you bitch." Tiffany's voice was a screech. "What did you tell them? Julian's been arrested. You did this." Silas didn't even look out the window. He just tapped the glass once. The driver surged forward, the crowd parting like a broken wave. I looked back and saw Tiffany being tackled by a security guard as she tried to throw a shoe at the car. For the first time in years, I didn't feel a flicker of pity. I felt a cold, deep satisfaction that tasted better than any meal Silas could provide. At the bank, the atmosphere was like a funeral. The board members, men who had laughed with Julian while they signed away my father's life's work, were now lined up against the wall, their hands shaking as they held pens. I sat at the head of the conference table. Silas stood behind me, his hand resting on the back of my chair, a silent reminder of the teeth behind my smile. "This is the transfer of assets," the lawyer whispered, pushing a stack of papers toward me. I signed my name over and over, each stroke of the pen a nail in Julian's coffin. When I reached the final page, the door burst open. Julian was there, flanked by 2 police officers. He wasn't in a tuxedo anymore. He was in a gray jumpsuit, his wrists bound in steel. "Ava, stop," he yelled, his face twisted in a mask of desperation. "I did it for us. I took the company so we could be rich. I was going to come back for you." I didn't look up from the paper. I signed the last line and slid the folder back to the lawyer. I stood up and walked toward Julian, the heels of my new shoes clicking with a lethal rhythm. I stopped inches from him. He smelled of sweat and fear. "You didn't do it for us, Julian," I said, my voice as flat as a tombstone. "You did it for Tiffany's 5-carat ring. You did it for the crystal flutes. And you did it because you thought I was too weak to ever find out." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled $20 bill Silas had saved from the gala floor. I tucked it into Julian's jumpsuit pocket. "Take it. Consider it a tip for teaching me my place." Julian let out a sob, falling to his knees as the officers pulled him away. Silas stepped up beside me, his cane clicking once. "That was a good start," he murmured. "But the bank was just the beginning. The man who actually cut the brakes, he just landed at the private airfield. And he's expecting a meeting with Julian." Silas looked at me, his eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. "He's a dangerous man, Ava. He doesn't care about money. He cares about blood. Are you ready to see the face of the man who killed your father?" I felt the weight of the signet ring Silas had given me that morning, heavy and cold on my finger. The tremor in my hands was completely gone. "I don't want to see his face, Silas," I said, looking toward the door. "I want him to see mine before I kill him." Silas didn't smile, but a glint of pride sparked in his sea-gray eyes. We walked out of the bank, but as we reached the sidewalk, a black van skidded to a halt in front of us. The side door slid open, and a man with a scarred face leveled a rifle at Silas's chest. "Vane," the man roared. Silas reacted faster than I thought a man with a cane could. He shoved me behind a concrete pillar just as the first shot shattered the bank's glass doors. The air was suddenly filled with the scent of gunpowder and the scream of sirens. Silas dived after me, his hand gripping my shoulder. "Stay down," he barked. He pulled a compact handgun from a hidden holster under his suit jacket and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. The man in the van slumped over, but the vehicle didn't stop. It accelerated, heading straight for us. Silas grabbed my hand and pulled me toward a narrow alleyway. We ran, the sound of boots echoing behind us. "There's more of them," Silas panted, his limp more pronounced now. We reached a dead end, a high brick wall topped with barbed wire. Silas turned, his gun raised, his breathing heavy. "Ava, listen to me. There's a loose brick behind that trash bin. Push it. There's a keypad. The code is your birthday." I looked at him, my heart hammering. "What about you?" Silas didn't look at me. He was focused on the entrance of the alley. "I'm going to buy you 30 seconds. Go." I dived for the bin, my fingers frantically searching for the brick. I found it, pushed, and the keypad lit up. I typed in the numbers and a heavy steel door groaned open. I looked back. The van had reached the alley and 3 men were jumping out, guns drawn. Silas stood in the center of the path, his silhouette braced against the brick walls, his gun steady. He fired and one of the men fell. "Go!" Silas screamed. I stepped inside the door, but I couldn't close it. Not yet. I watched as Silas fired his last round. The 2 remaining men were closing in. One of them raised his gun, aiming at Silas's head. "Silas!" I shrieked. Just as the man squeezed the trigger, a black car roared into the alley from the other end, slamming into the gunmen and pinning them against the wall. It was Leo, Silas's head of security. He jumped out, his own weapon clearing the rest of the path. Silas slumped against the wall, his cane dropping to the pavement. I ran out to him, my knees hitting the dirty asphalt. "Silas, are you hit?" He looked at me, a smear of blood on his temple, his chest heaving. He reached out and touched my face, his fingers trembling. "I told you to go," he whispered. "I'm not leaving you," I said, my voice breaking. Silas grabbed my hand, his grip still surprisingly strong. "Then the training is over, Ava. They know where we are. They know who you are. The war isn't coming anymore." He looked at the burning wreck of the van, the flames reflecting in his eyes. The war is here. The safe house was a windowless concrete bunker deep beneath an old brewery on the edge of the docks. The air smelled of salt, damp stone, and the metallic tang of Silas's blood. Leo was working on Silas's shoulder, the light of a single surgical lamp making the scene look like a painting of a battlefield. Silas didn't make a sound as the needle pierced his skin, but his knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the table. I stood in the corner, my cream suit now stained with soot and oil, watching the man who had turned my world upside down. "It was the Vipers," Leo muttered, dropping a blood-stained bullet into a metal bowl. "The scarred man was Merrick. He's been their top cleaner for a decade. If he's in the city, the council has officially sanctioned the hit on you, boss." Silas gritted his teeth as Leo bandaged the wound. "They didn't come for me," Silas rasped, his eyes finding mine in the shadows. "They came for Ava. They know she signed the papers. They know she's the one holding the keys to the bank now." I stepped forward into the light. "The bank? Why does a mob council care about a commercial bank?" Silas sat up, his face pale but his expression as sharp as a razor. "It's not just a bank, Ava. Your father's company was developing a software, a way to track untraceable digital transactions. Julian didn't just want the money. He sold the prototype to the Vipers. But the encryption key, your father hid it. And he told everyone it would only unlock for his blood." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "The signet ring." Silas nodded. "The ring is the key. As long as you're alive and wearing it, they can't access the billions in laundered money they have hidden in those accounts. You aren't just my friend's daughter anymore, Ava. You're the only person standing between the council and total global dominance." I looked at the ring on my finger, the gold suddenly feeling like a shackle. So Julian was just a distraction. A puppet to keep me occupied while they looked for the key. "Exactly," Silas said, standing up and swaying slightly. I reached out to steady him and he leaned into me, his weight heavy and solid. "But they made a mistake. They thought I was protecting you out of sentiment. They didn't realize I was training you to replace them." He looked at Leo. "Is the jet ready?" Leo nodded. "Waiting at the private strip. But we have to move now." Marek's team was just the first wave. We moved through the tunnels of the brewery, the sound of the ocean getting louder as we approached a hidden dock. A small, fast boat was waiting, its engine idling in the dark. As we boarded, Silas handed me a heavy, cold object wrapped in cloth. I unwrapped it to find a sleek, black handgun. "I don't know how to use this," I whispered. Silas covered my hands with his voice low and steady. "You've spent your whole life being a victim, Ava. Being the person things happen to. Tonight that ends. You learn to be the person who makes things happen." The boat tore through the black water of the harbor, the city skyline a distant, glowing ribcage. We reached the airfield just as the sun was beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a bloody light across the tarmac. The jet was there, its engines whining, but so were 3 black SUVs parked in a semicircle around the hangar. Silas cursed under his breath. "Leo, take the flank. Ava, stay behind me." We stepped off the boat and moved toward the plane, the air thick with tension. A man stepped out of the middle SUV. He was older, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than my farmhouse. This was Victor, the head of the council. "Silas," he called out, his voice smooth and cultured. "You've always been a romantic. But surely even you can see this is over. Give us the girl and you can keep your life. You can even keep the vineyard in Italy." Silas didn't stop walking. "You killed my friend Victor. You turned his daughter into a servant. And you think I'm going to let you walk away with his legacy?" Victor sighed, a sound of mock disappointment. "I was hoping we could be civilized. But I suppose blood is the only language you truly understand." He raised his hand and a dozen men stepped out from behind the SUVs, rifles leveled. Silas stopped and looked at me. He didn't look afraid. He looked almost at peace. "Ava," he whispered, "remember what I told you in the alley? The code." I nodded, my heart hammering. "The plane's door has the same keypad. When I say move, you run. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything. Leo and I will hold them." "No, Silas." He grabbed my face, his eyes fierce. "Do it. For your father. For your mother. For the life you deserve." He turned back to Victor and shouted, "Now!" Silas dived forward, firing into the line of men. Leo erupted from the side, a storm of lead following him. I ran. I ran like my life depended on it, because it did. The sound of gunfire was deafening, the air filled with the smell of burning rubber and blood. I reached the plane, my fingers flying over the keypad. My birthday. The door groaned open and I scrambled inside. I turned back to the tarmac. Silas was down on one knee, his gun empty, a man closing in on him with a knife. Leo was pinned behind a car, unable to reach him. "Silas!" I screamed. I looked at the gun Silas had given me. I remembered the weight of it, the coldness. I stepped to the edge of the door, leveled the weapon and pulled the trigger. The man with the knife fell. Silas looked up, surprise flickering across his face. He scrambled to his feet and ran for the plane, sliding inside just as a bullet shattered the glass of the door. Leo dived in a second later and the door slammed shut. The plane surged forward, the G-force pinning us to our seats. As we lifted off, I looked out the window and saw Victor standing on the tarmac, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Silas slumped into the seat next to me, blood soaking through his bandage, but he was laughing. A wild, triumphant sound that echoed through the cabin. He looked at me, his eyes shining. "You did it, Ava. You took the shot." I looked at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. They were steady. "I had a good teacher," I said. Silas reached out and took my hand, his thumb brushing over the signet ring. "The vineyard in Italy is beautiful this time of year," he murmured. "And the wine is even better when you don't have to serve it." I leaned my head back against the seat, the weight of the last 24 hours finally beginning to lift. I wasn't the waitress from the gala. I wasn't the girl Julian had abandoned. I was Ava Vane. And the world was finally going to learn my place. If you believe Ava and Silas earned their happy ending in Italy, hit the like button so more people hear their victory. The Italian sun was different from the one in the city. It was softer, smelling of rosemary and ancient stone. For 6 months, the only war I fought was against the stubborn weeds in the garden of the villa Silas had bought me. We lived in a world of silence, protected by a small army of guards who moved like shadows among the olive trees. Silas walked with a heavy limp now, his cane a permanent fixture, but the coldness in his eyes had begun to thaw, replaced by a quiet, fierce devotion. We were sitting on the terrace one evening, the sky a bruised purple, when Leo walked up the path. He didn't have to say anything. The look on his face told me the piece was over. He handed Silas a tablet. Silas scrolled through the images, his jaw tightening. He handed it to me. It was a photo of the bank back home. It was in ruins, a blackened skeleton of stone. And pinned to the remains of the front door was a single bloody uniform, my old waitressing dress. "They found the clinic," Leo whispered. "They know you're alive. Victor has put a $50 million bounty on your head, Ava. The council has dissolved, but the Vipers have taken over. They aren't looking for the key anymore. They're looking for revenge." I looked at the photo of the dress, the polyester fabric I used to hate, now a symbol of everything I'd survived. Silas stood up, his cane clicking sharply against the stone. "They think we're hiding. They think we're afraid." He looked at me, his face a mask of the ghost king he used to be. "Ava, I gave you a life here. I gave you peace. If you want, Leo can take you to a safe house in Switzerland. You can disappear forever." I stood up beside him, the emerald signet ring glinting in the twilight. "I'm not a girl who disappears anymore, Silas. And I'm not a girl who hides." I walked inside and opened the velvet box on the dresser. I pulled out the black handgun, checked the magazine, and tucked it into the waistband of my silk trousers. I walked back out to the terrace where Silas and Leo were waiting. "Where are they?" I asked. Leo looked at Silas, who nodded once. "The Vipers have a compound in the Alps. Victor is there, trying to reconstruct the software with a team of hackers. They're vulnerable, but they have a small army. Then we bring a bigger one," I said. The assault on the Alps compound was a symphony of fire. We didn't sneak in. We hit the front gates with an armored truck, the roar of the engines echoing through the snow-capped peaks. I was in the center of the fray, moving with a calm I didn't know I possessed. Every time I pulled the trigger, I thought of Julian's mockery. I thought of Tiffany's heel. I thought of my father's cut brakes. We reached the inner sanctum, a glass-walled room where Victor was frantically typing at a terminal. He looked up as the door was kicked open, his eyes widening in terror as he saw me. "Ava, wait. I can give you everything. The money, the power." I didn't say a word. I walked up to the terminal, pulled the signet ring from my finger and slammed it into the interface. The screens turned red. A single word flashed across every monitor: deleted. "The software is gone, Victor," I said, leaning over the desk. "And the money?" "I moved it to a dozen charities for the homeless and the sick an hour ago. You're not a boss anymore. You're just an old man in a room." Victor lunged for a gun in his desk, but a shot rang out from the doorway. He slumped over, a single bullet hole in his forehead. Silas stepped into the room, smoke curling from his barrel. He walked toward me, his limp heavy but his gaze steady. He looked at the terminal, then at me. "You ended it," he whispered. I picked up the signet ring and put it back on my finger. "No, Silas. We ended it." We walked out of the burning compound into the cold, crisp air of the mountains. The war was finally truly over. But as we reached the car, Silas stopped. He leaned against the door, his face pale, his breath hitching. "Ava." I ran to him, catching him as his knees buckled. "Silas, what is it?" He pulled his hand away from his side. It was covered in blood. A stray bullet from the final skirmish had found its mark. "No, no, Silas, stay with me," I yelled, pressing my hands against the wound. Leo was already calling for the medic, but Silas grabbed my wrist, his grip weakening. "Ava, listen to me. The vineyard, it's yours. The life, it's yours. Don't you dare say goodbye to me, Silas Vane." I shrieked, tears blurring my vision. "You promised me a life. You promised me we'd rule together." Silas looked at me, a soft, sad smile touching his lips. He reached up and brushed a tear from my cheek. "You don't need me to rule, Ava. You already are the queen." His eyes drifted shut, his hand falling limp against the snow. "Silas." My scream echoed through the mountains, a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. Years later, a woman sits on the terrace of a villa in Tuscany. She wears a simple black dress and an emerald signet ring that sparkles in the sun. Beside her, a young boy with sea-gray eyes is learning how to skip stones in the fountain. A man walks up the path, leaning heavily on a cane, his face scarred but his smile warm. Silas sits down beside her, his hand finding hers. "He's getting better at it," he murmurs, nodding toward the boy. I lean my head against his shoulder, the warmth of his skin a miracle I never stopped thanking the world for. "He has his father's determination," I say. The world still remembers the name Vane. They remember the bank that collapsed. They remember the Mafia council that vanished into thin air. But they don't know about the woman who serves wine to her family under the Italian sun. They don't know about the nurse who became a queen. I look at the vineyard, the grapes heavy and ripe, a harvest of a different kind. The debt is paid. The war is won. And finally, my place is exactly where I want it to be. If this story broke your heart and then healed it, leave a like so I know to tell more stories of those who rose from the ashes.